Hello everyone. In this session, I'm going to discuss the remaining part of aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. So in the first part, we talked about the macroeconomic equilibrium, and then we discussed recessionary and inflationary gaps. Now we are going to discuss how an increase in aggregate demand or how a rightward shift in aggregate demand will change or will increase price level and equilibrium real GDP. So if you look at this diagram on your screen, aggregate supply is upward sloping line, as you know. I did not draw uh, the full employment level of real GDP, that is potential GDP. So long run aggregate supply curve is not drawn in this diagram at least. An increase in aggregate demand, that is an increase in not in aggregate quantity demanded, but increase in aggregate demand. Let's assume this is because of increase in investment by $10 million. So if you notice here, let me fix, oh yeah. So if you notice here, investment increases by $10 million, suppose, okay? So initially, look at this diagram. Initially, the equilibrium real GDP was 800. Equilibrium real GDP was 800, okay? And price index was P1. This was the initial equilibrium. When you shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, because of the increase in investment by 10 million, then notice that I shifted the aggregate demand curve here. This is 82 here. And if you notice at P1, aggregate demand is here. Now the point on the aggregate demand, this distance is 825. So I told you that I increased investment by only 10 million, but the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right by 25 million. So why is this so? What is the reason behind it? Why an increase in increase in investment, sorry, by only, so let me write here. This is aggregate demand, you all know. Aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G plus net export. This is aggregate demand. When you increase aggregate demand by 10 million, then this, oh sorry, investment by 10 million, then aggregate demand should increase by 10 million. But I am increasing this aggregate demand to 25 million. So what is the reason behind it? Okay, so we are going to discuss this reason why when investment increases by $10, aggregate demand shifts more than $10, more than $10 million, that is $25 million. This is what we call multiplier effect. Now, what is multiplier effect? Let's continue this and extend this example further and show you here. So suppose investment increases by 10 million, okay? So when investment increases by 10 million, what does this mean? It means that now investors are investing this $10 million. This $10 million will be someone else's income. So this will increase income for the contractors, suppliers, and their employees. So all these people will, of course, receive this $10 million, which is the income basically of these workers, contractors, suppliers, and their employees. Now, when these people receive this $10 in the form of income, what are they going to do with this income? So part of this income will be paid in taxes. Some of it will be saved, and some of it will be spent on imports. So suppose if I receive a part of this income, this $10 million, I have four options basically. One option is not option, I have to pay income taxes. Then I might save. Third, I might spend on imported goods, which will not be included in aggregate demand. Remember, we subtract imports. But significant portion of this income is spent on domestically produced goods and services. This is what we call consumption. So when these people receive this $10 million in the form of income, they will pay taxes, save, spend on imports, but they also buy goods and services that are domestically produced. This is what we call consumption expenditure C. So C will also increase, of course, by less than 10 million, because some of this amount will be saved and paid as taxes and on imports as well. Let's assume, and this is the assumption which we will discuss in the next chapter. So let's assume that these consumers who are going to spend this money on domestically produced goods and services, they spend, suppose, 60% of their income. So 40% will be used as taxes, savings, and imports, okay, on imports. So 60%. So we write 60% as 0.6. So this 0.6, is, there's a specific name for this 0.6. This is called MPC. That is marginal propensity to consume. By marginal propensity to consume, I mean if you receive $1 additional income, out of that $1, how much you are going to spend on consumption. So 0.6 means 60 cents. So for every dollar, you are going to spend 60 cents. This is the meaning of MPC. So let's assume MPC equal to 0.6. It could be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. It could be even 1. 1 means you are not saving, you are not paying taxes. You just spend all income to your consumption. That is not feasible, basically. But anyway, that is the extreme. So the extreme values are from 0 to 1. 0 means you are saving all your income or paying taxes or import, but you're not spending on domestically produced goods and services. Anyways, so 0.6. So if this is 10 million income, then 0.6, that is 60% of 10 million is 6 billion. Oh, okay, not million. This is, okay, let me write it. I'm sorry. This is $1 billion. $10 billion, although it's not mentioned, but here it is mentioned. So now the 60% of 10 billion is 6 billion. So $6 billion in consumption. So see what is happening actually. Let me write here so that you know what I'm doing. When, sorry, this is aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus XN. When investment increases by 10 billion dollars, sorry, consumption will also increase by $6 billion. Okay. But this consumption expenditure, $6 billion, will be someone else's income as well. And therefore, this $6 billion will be again taxed, saved, spent on imports, and then on domestically produced goods and services. So we assume the MPC 0.6. So 60% of $6 billion is 3.6 billion. So you have 3.6 billion in consumption. So consumption will further increase by 3.6 billion dollars. Okay. So let me erase this and finalize what I'm trying to say. So see actually what is happening. This is aggregate demand, okay, which is C plus I plus G plus X. Okay. Now investment increases initially by $10 billion. Increase. So aggregate demand, of course, will also increase by 10 billion because the aggregate demand is C plus I plus G plus Xn. But this increase in 10 billion investment will increase consumption first by 6 billion, then 3.6 billion, then 60% of 3.6 billion. So it will continue. And this is infinite series. So if I add this, what number will I get here? So the rule is simple. If I add this, so basically I'm adding this, I'm doing this like this, 10, 6, 3.6, and I want to add this number. If you add all this number, there's a formula, and the formula is given here, this. So the formula is 1 divided by 1 minus an MPC 0.6. This is the formula. So 1 over 1 minus 0.6 is equal to 1 over 0.4, and 1 over point, you can use your calculator, you will get 22.5. So this is the value of multiplier. So if you increase investment by $10 billion, then to aggregate demand will, so this is the value of multiplier. So if you increase investment by $10 billion, then to aggregate demand will increase by how much? By this multiplier times the initial increase in investment, that is 2.5 times 10. This is equal to $25 billion. This is what is shown here. So see, I increase investment by $10 billion. The aggregate demand shifts to the right by $25 billion. That is 10 times 2.5. And how I have calculated this 2.5 based on the assumption that MPC equal to 0.6. So this is the value of multiplier 2.5. So change in income, that is aggregate demand, will be multiplier times change in investment, that is $25 billion. Now, if you look at this diagram, what is happening, that initially, so let me mark this and you understand. So initially, I increase investment by $10 billion. Because of the multiplier effect, the real GDP will increase by $825 billion. But with this demand and with this supply, because there's no change in supply at this price level. At P1, supply is same at 800. But now because of the increase in investment by 10 billion, the aggregate demand will be 25 billion. That is 25 billion more than supply 800 billion. So 25 billion is a shortage. And because of this shortage, price will increase. This increase in price, if you remember, when I was talking about the negative slope aggregate demand curve, I told you that when price increases, aggregate quantity demanded decreases. So aggregate quantity demanded decreases means you move from point B towards point C, and eventually you reach to this new equilibrium point. So yes, the equilibrium real GDP will increase, but not by the $25 billion. It is increased by only $15 billion increase. So why there's less, why the multiplier effect is slightly less than what it should be? Simply because of the increase in price level. Okay. So in this diagram, what I want you to understand is the concept of multiplier. That is when investment increases by 10 billion or government expenditure increases by 10 billion, 20 billion, aggregate demand will increase more than 10 billion because of the multiplier effect. And you know, whenever aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, it will increase both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So this is your basically you have to just read this. Whatever I explained is once again explained here. So yeah, so just see this 10 billion, then 6, then 3.6, then 2.2, then 1.3. So every time 60% of the number, right? And when you add this, you will get the same answer. Now, I showed you what would happen when aggregate demand when aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. And I also discussed the concept of multiply. So you have to just understand this diagram, and if you don't, then you have to read the textbook as well. So I'm just leaving this as your homework. Now we shift the aggregate supply curve. But I told you that if I shift the long run aggregate supply curve will also shift automatically. If I shift only aggregate supply curve, long run aggregate supply curve does not shift. Okay. So here you can see there's no long run aggregate supply in this diagram. So I'm just shifting the short run aggregate supply curve. And this short run aggregate supply curve will shift alone without impacting long run aggregate supply curve only if the price of any factor of production increases. Any one of the factors of production increases. So a change in the price of a factor of production will shift the aggregate supply curve, resulting in an increase in GDP, but a fall in the price level. I know that by this change, I mean decrease. Because if the price of factor of production decreases, it means cost of production is decreasing, and therefore suppliers are willing to supply more, and therefore the curve, aggregate supply curve, shifts to the right. You know what is the impact? The impact is decrease in equilibrium price and increase in real GDP. Okay. Now this is the most complicated case where I shift both aggregate supply and long run aggregate supply as well. You know the rule. So first the aggregate demand is same, and long run aggregate supply initially was LS1 and AS1 is the initial supply curve. You can see this is the equilibrium point, whereas P1 is the price. Now I shift the long run aggregate supply to the right. You know what are the sources of economic growth? Increase in labor, increase in capital, increase in natural resources, and advancement in technology. So all these four factors will shift, any one of these four factors will shift LAS curve to the right. And AS curve will automatically shift to the right as well by the same amount. So notice that this distance is same between the two AS curve and between the two LAS curve. Notice where's the new equilibrium? The new equilibrium is here. Old one was this one. New one is this. So notice that this is the new equilibrium. So I know real GDP will increase, price will decrease. But notice one thing. This equilibrium, this is the actual, this is Y2 is the actual real GDP. Okay, actual equilibrium GDP. But full employment is at LAS2, that is this. So we have a gap. And this gap is called, if you remember, is a recessionary gap. Why recessionary gap? Because the actual GDP is less than the full employment level of GDP. So we have unemployment in the country. Okay. Although we started with full employment, but because of the shifting of LAS and AS curve, we have now unemployment in the country. Okay. And you know, price will decrease when aggregate supply, both long run aggregate supply and aggregate supply shift to the right. Now, causes of inflation. So in previous chapter, we talked about inflation, that is increase in general price level. And usually we measure inflation uh, using consumer price index. That is the fixed basket of consumer goods and services only. Here we are taking basically GDP deflator. So there are two types of inflation. One is called demand pull inflation, and the other one is uh, cost push inflation. So using this diagram, we can explain what is demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation means when aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. So you can see we have inflation. Price will go up. This is inflation. And cost push inflation, when supply curve shifts to the left, that is, there's a supply shock, maybe because of very high oil prices, and because of the COVID-19, we have supply shock. And because of this supply shock, notice what is happening. Prices is still increasing. Remember, I'm not shifting the long run aggregate supply, because what I'm saying that now the price of oil uh, has gone up. And because of this increase in the cost of production, increase in the factor of production, oil, it will increase the cost of production. And therefore, suppliers are supply less. Notice the difference between these two diagrams. If inflation is caused by demand, that is by increase in demand, yes, we have inflation, but at the same time, real GDP is increasing. How come you produce more? By reducing unemployment. So yes, we have a problem of inflation, but there's less unemployment in the country. Here, in this case, if you have inflation because of the supply shortages, yes, prices are increasing, that is inflation, but real GDP is also decreasing. So we have a problem of unemployment as well. So this condition is better than this one. Here we have inflation, but we don't have unemployment because output is increasing. So we have less unemployment. Here we have inflation as well as unemployment. So if we have both cases, that is inflation and unemployment, this is called stagflation. Stagflation. So stag for stagnant, inflation is inflation, stagflation. Okay. Causes of recession. By recession, I mean decrease in real GDP. This is the meaning of recession. So a recession might be caused by a decrease in aggregate demand. Remember, I said that inflation is caused by increase in aggregate demand. Recession is caused by decrease in aggregate demand. Recession means unemployment in the country, or decrease in real GDP, or by a decrease in aggregate supply as shown in the last slide. So see, when I shift the demand curve to the left, you see that real GDP is decreasing, means unemployment in the country. This is a recession, but recession due to decrease in demand. We also have recession here, if you see here in this diagram. In this diagram, this diagram, we have recession. See, real GDP is decreasing because of the shifting in the supply curve. So we have recession here if the supply curve shifts to the left, and we have recession decreasing because of the shifting in the supply curve. So we have recession here if the supply curve shifts to the left, and we have recession if the demand curve shifts to the left as well. Okay. So now we want to talk about three basically views regarding this problem of unemployment and inflation. Okay. So these first we'll discuss these two views, and then we'll discuss the modern view. So new classical view. These are the assumptions of new classical school of thought. The market is competitive and efficient. By competitive and efficient market, I mean there's no government intervention. So markets are freely operating at the equilibrium. Prices and wages adjust rapidly to a surplus or shortage. So wages are 100% flexible, both downward and upward. What do we mean by this? So for example, if there's huge unemployment in the country, wages will go down. because if you don't find any employment, you will be willing to work at a lower wage. Suppliers or employers will be enticed or will be attracted to hire workers at a lower wages, okay, and therefore they might hire you. Similarly, if there's overemployment, if employers cannot find workers, then workers would rather work at a higher wage, so wage rate will increase. So if you have unemployment, wage rate will decrease. If you have overemployment, wage rate will increase. So new classicals assume that wages are flexible in both directions, real quick, instantaneously. Okay. Economy always remains at full employment. So according to new classic, there's no concept of unemployment. So unemployment will not occur, because whenever there is unemployment, wage rate will fall and everyone will be hired again. And this duration is instantaneous. I mean, you can't see that unemployment exists and it will be eliminated by decreasing the wage rate and price level. So you won't see. That is instantaneous. So according to new classical, economy will always be operating at full employment. So if economy is already operating at full employment, we don't need to draw aggregate supply curve, that is AS curve. We just draw long run aggregate supply curve, that is full employment. So according to new classical, remember and read my words, new classical, they think there's no unemployment. There's no concept of unemployment in neoclassical view. So this is this view using aggregate demand and aggregate supply model or diagram. Notice we have only potential GDP, that is long run aggregate supply curve, and they say that economy will always be operating at full employment level of output. Now, if you try to increase aggregate demand curve, although it says upward, but the direction should be like this. So if you shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, what will happen? Only inflation will occur. There's no point shifting the aggregate demand curve. So neoclassical are against this government intervention. They think that let the market work and will always be automatically be at full employment level of output. Remember, don't worry about this increase in price. Let me spend a couple of more minutes and explain you the logic behind it. So this is the logic. See, you are right now at full employment at this point. Prices is this, okay? Now, if aggregate demand increases, that is now suppose investors are investing more, suppose government is spending more, suppose consumers are also buying more goods and services, and suppose foreigners are also buying our goods and services. What would happen? What would happen? Then, of course, price will increase because now there's more demand. There's more demand, so it will exert pressure on prices. Price will increase. And price will increase up to this point, where you have find another point of intersection. What is actually happening when demand increases? Workers quickly demand higher wages. Why? Because these producers need to produce more because of the higher demand. But since workers are asking higher wages, so the suppliers will hire the same number of workers still, produce the same level of product, but charging you higher prices. Why they are charging you higher prices? They are charging you higher prices because they are paying higher wages. So your real wage once again will be the same. So it's like this. Earlier, before the shift in the demand, your real wage is W1 over P1. This is nominal wage and this is price. When demand increases to 82, nothing will change. Now you demand higher wages, let's say W2, which is higher than the W1, but price is also higher from P1 to P2. Again, you are getting this real wage W2 over P2, which is exactly equal. So your real wage is equal, nothing will change. It will simply increase the price and wage at the same time. So according to neoclassical, there's no role for government basically. Because why? Because there's no such problem exist. The market will adjust automatically. So this is their view. Now, what is a Keynesian view? So according to Keynesian view, the market is not very competitive due to market power of big corporations and unions, that is labor unions. Prices and wages are sticky, adjust slowly. For example, if I'm working and I'm earning, let's say, $20 an hour, and I sign a contract for 6 months, after 3 months, suppose if there's huge unemployment in the country, then my employer cannot reduce my wage rate, that is $20 an hour, because I've already signed a contract. So workers, they actually sign contracts, and therefore wages are not flexible. I'm not saying will not flexible ever. In the short run, it's not. So for example, if I sign a contract for 6 months, yes, my wages are sticky, are not flexible. Yes, after 6 months, it may go down or go up. I don't know. But for that duration, it is fixed, number one. Second, wages are typically downward, uh, are upward flexible, but not downward. So we have a ratchet effect. That is, wages will go in only one direction, that is, will increase. But you seldom see that wages are decreasing over the years. So that is the problem. So according to Keynesian view, government intervention is required to maintain full employment. And actually, this happened in 1930 when we had a Great Depression. And because of the lower aggregate demand, consumers are not spending money, investors are not investing money, and therefore we had serious recession. This is what we call depression. And because of that recession, we had huge unemployment. According to neoclassical, they say don't do anything. Everything will be taken care of because of the flexibility in wages. But it didn't happen at that time. So then these group, that is this group, Keynesian economists, this group says that government is important to fix the problem of unemployment. How? By increasing the demand, because consumer are not demanding, just increase demand by giving them incentives, or government can also spend money into the system so that economic activities take place, and that will create employment in the country. So according to Keynesian view, this is basically the real life situation, that economy can be operating at less than full employment. So yes, we have full employment here, but economy can be operating at unemployment. It will not jump from Y1 to YFE in 1 second. It takes time. So during that time, people will have trouble, right? Because they are not earning anything. So this is the government job to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right from 81 to 82. So notice there is no inflation, only more real GDP, that is more employment in the country. Okay. How government will control this aggregate demand? You know what is aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is C plus I plus G plus exports, net exports. Yes, government can provide incentive to investors, provide incentives to industry so that they can export more. Yes, provide incentive to other consumers by lowering tax rates, whatever. But the direct variable is sitting here, that is government expenditures. And the other policy of the government is hidden in this capital C, that is taxes. So if government reduces income tax, consumer will spend more money, and therefore demand will increase. So these are the two tools that government use to fix the problem of unemployment. That is G, capital G, government expenditures, and taxes. This is called fiscal tools. So these are fiscal tools, and this is also, how to use these fiscal tools is what we call fiscal policy that we'll discuss in later chapters. Now there's a modern view as well. Modern view is basically argues that both are correct basically. Neoclassical are correct if you're only considering long run scenario. Yes, in the long run it is possible, but in the short run it is not possible. That is Keynesian view. So according to modern view, the impact of a change in aggregate demand or shift in aggregate demand depends on the condition of the economy. According to neoclassical, they say that if you shift the humans government, shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, it will only lead to inflation. Keynesian are saying that if government increases aggregate demand, it will increase real GDP and there's no change in inflation. Both are correct. One is in the short run, the other one is in the long run. So according to modern view, it depends on the condition of the society. In big recessions, there's a big effect on GDP. At close to potential GDP, the effect will be more inflationary. So let me show you the diagram, you'll understand this side. So these are the two different conditions in this diagram, if you notice. One is if you are operating, you means the economy is operating somewhere here at, let's say, at Y1. See, Y1 is far away from full employment GDP, that is Y4. So you have huge unemployment in the country. Yes, if this is the case, yes, if government increases aggregate demand by increasing its expenditure, you can see, yes, there is an increase in price, but a very minor increase in price, but increase in GDP is a lot. And therefore, you are reducing unemployment in the country. But if the economy is already operating at near the full employment, So if the economy is operating near the full employment level here at Y3, then if government shifts aggregate demand curve to the right by increasing its own expenditure, yes, unemployment will reduce, but at the same time, you will have to face the problem of inflation. So that is a dilemma basically, because when government tries to reduce unemployment, it will create inflation. And when government try to decrease inflation, it will create unemployment. So there's no fixed solution to these two problems together. Now we talk about the self-adjustment process. Remember, don't get confused with this process. First, I said that neoclassical economists believe that government should not intervene in the market, let the market work, and we will always have full employment, real GDP. So there's no problem of unemployment. This is neoclassical view. Keynesian view is that because of sticky wages, the economy will not adjust right away quickly, and therefore we need government intervention. So we do have possibilities when when the countries have unemployment, and therefore government will need to intervene and do something to solve the problem of unemployment. So neoclassical are against government intervention. Keynesian are in favor of government intervention. This is self-adjusting process. This is basically neoclassical says that the economy will achieve its full employment level of real GDP in 1 second. Let me put it this way. So you won't see unemployment in the country. This slide tells you that if government does not intervene in the market, and if we have suppose unemployment in the country, then this problem of unemployment can be solved automatically without any government intervention, but with the assumption that wages are flexible in both directions, that is upward and downward. So this analysis is close to neoclassical, but neoclassical says that the adjustment is real quick. So you don't have to see this adjustment process. Here we are just showing you that if it takes time, how this economy will automatically, without any government intervention, will reach to full employment equilibrium. So let's discuss in both cases, right? So in the first case, notice that aggregate demand is this, aggregate supply is this, long run aggregate supply is this. Okay, so now you can see that this is the this is this is the equilibrium price right now. Okay, so we have equilibrium price is P1. Let me mark this P1. Y1 is the equilibrium real GDP, but full employment or potential GDP is higher than equilibrium GDP. So we have recession, right? Recession means what? Recession means unemployment in the country. So we have, let me write here. So we have unemployment. According to Keynesian view, government should increase its own expenditures and shift the demand curve to the right, like this. So let me change the color. This is not automatic adjustment process. This is Keynesian view, that you just shift the aggregate demand curve here. So if you shift the aggregate by increasing your government expenditure, notice the new equilibrium is here. Yes, we do have some inflation, as I told you, that you will have some inflation, but sorry, this is not working. But there is no unemployment. You are still at the full employment. So this is the Keynesian solution. What is automatic adjustment process? This is given as follows. See, so I know that initially this economy is experiencing a recessionary gap because the actual, my pen is not working now. I don't know what happened. Just give me a second. Let me refresh my. So, yeah, now it's working. Thanks God. Okay, I don't know why it was stuck. Let me change the font size. That's working. So now see this. So the economy right now, font size. That's working. So now see this. So the economy right now, this is the equilibrium GDP. This is the full employment. So we have recessionary gap. Now, according to this self-adjustment process, whenever you have recession in the country, there's huge unemployment in the country. What would happen? Workers are willing to work at a lower wage rate. So wages fall. And of course, it will be profitable for producers to hire them. And therefore, they are enticed to hire them, and aggregate supply shifts right. Remember, long run aggregate supply does not change because I'm not changing factors of production. I'm just saying the cost of hiring workers decreases. And therefore, they tend to produce, they means all these producers produce more in order to reap higher profits. And therefore, aggregate supply curve shifts right until natural full employment level is reached. So see, this aggregate supply curve, this is shifting to the right until it intersects here. So this is the new equilibrium. Notice at this equilibrium, you have full employment. So there's no problem of unemployment. Unemployment is solved automatically, but with the assumption that wages are flexible downward. According to Keynesian, wages are not flexible downward. According to New Classical, this whole adjustment process you can't see. It's really quick. The reverse is also true. So for example, if you have actual GDP is this, whereas full employment is this, so you have inflationary gap. How to solve this? That is, you have overemployment in the country. So when you have inflationary gap, overemployment, inflationary gap means overemployment. So when you have overemployment, then if you want to work, uh, the supply will have to hire workers at a high wage, because you don't find unemployed workers easily, and therefore workers will start charging higher rates. So they demand higher wages. That will increase the cost of production. Aggregate supply shift left until eventually natural full employment is reached. So aggregate supply curve shifts to the left, and eventually you reach to this point, which is also full employment. So this is again full employment, but this time you have some inflation or increase in price index as well. So that's all as far as these topics are concerned. So these are the topics, right, that we discussed in these two sessions. What is potential GDP? That is basically GDP at full employment level of output. At full employment, GDP at full employment, I'm sorry. Sources of economic growth, labor, capital, natural resources, and technology. That is increasing these factors of production or decrease or changes basically. Ideas of aggregate demand and aggregate supply and how they generate macroeconomic equilibrium, determinants of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and the concept of multiply, concept of demultiply, causes of recessions and inflationary booms, that is the shifting of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and Keynesian, neoclassical, and modern views of the economy pertaining to basically unemployment and inflation. So let me stop here. Thank you so much. Take care.